Atlantis. Atlantis is rather misnamed because it gives the impression that it was limited to one small island, the provenance of which has been hotly discussed. Now, the main island that we know as Atlantis has long since disappeared under the waves. But the problem is that every time there is an Earth shift, the planet alters in shape somewhat and land masses rise and fall, causing a total reforming of the planet. So, the original island that was the home base of Atlantis is now under the sea, the closest landmass existing today being Portugal in the Atlantic Ocean. Of course, the shape of the planet was much different before the ELE that provoked the destruction of Atlantis. As we have stated in a previous message, it is difficult to speak just of an island, giving the impression that Atlantis was limited to one small landmass and thus ignoring the rest of the world, because not only were there large land masses, much as they are now, but at its height, Atlantean civilization had spread to many of these land masses, and operations of various sorts were carried out on these land masses closely or distantly connected to the main island. We have the impression today that most of what went on was of a scientific nature. This was not so. Although experiments and projects answering that description were predominant in certain areas, by far the main activities on a day-to-day basis were much as are carried out today, providing food, clothing, housing, and the million and one tasks that occupy people's minds today. The people resembled humans of today and lived in houses, huts, and very much the sorts of constructions that exist today. Clothing tended to be robes in warm areas, but in colder climes people made use of whatever they could manufacture or scavenge from nature to protect them from the cold. Building materials tended to be stone on the main island of Atlantis, as the natural trees had long been felled to make room for buildings, as the island was not very large and a huge number of people lived there. The technology was, in fact, much like what would be available today on Earth if the hidden advanced technologies would be released into the public domain. These technologies were spread far and wide over the planet. Of course, there were rural and forest areas, much like there are today, where people lived very simply, but there were also urban areas where advanced machinery for heating and lighting was available. There was also extensive use made of flying machines using anti-gravity techniques. This could be available on Earth today if these techniques were not reserved just for secret military use. Religion was not widely followed in the sense that it is today, but there was respect for the Prime Creator. So we wish to present a picture of a civilization that was not very dissimilar to that which could be available on Earth today if it were not for the jealously guarded secrets by what you refer to as the industrial military complex. The main island that you refer to as Atlantis was very modern and made use to a certain degree of crystals to produce energy, but nowhere near the degree that modern myths suggest. It was realized by the Atlantean population that crystals can be rather unpredictable in their effects, their powers rising into the astral and etheric realms and thus affecting people far beyond the hoped-for power, which was largely just for practical and communication reasons. The period of time that the Atlantean civilization existed was for several hundreds of thousands of years before it was halted in its tracks by the ELE that we mentioned earlier. These ELEs smite the planet Earth from time to time and have wiped out advanced civilizations on a regular basis, each time forcing the surviving populations and the people introduced by the DOL or Directors of Life to reset the clock and start from virtually cavemen again. Modern people are interested in contact with interdimensional beings, so we will say that some contact with what you refer to as alien groups did happen. But as the system of government was much more open and honest, contact with the Greys was kept to a minimum as opposed to what is happening on Earth today. The alien visitors were carefully vetted to discover their true intentions before being allowed to interact with the Atlantean civilization. For those curious concerning communication, we will say that telepathy was widely used, but they did have a language that Sanskrit is now based on. This does not imply that the written language was like written Sanskrit today, nor was the pronunciation like the way that Sanskrit is spoken today. So we repeat, Atlantis was an island which gave its name to a civilization that spread over much of the planet Earth. Although planet Earth has been greatly altered by the ELE that destroyed both Atlantis and virtually all of its population. Thus it would be pointless in trying to describe the geography of the Atlantean sovereignty, because much of where people lived then is underwater today.